There are some mysteries that feel as though they were written. Not lived, but meticulously constructed like a novel penned by a master of espionage and suspense, a story where every character is an enigma, every object a potential clue, and every chapter ends on a question that only leads to a deeper, more profound state of uncertainty. These are cases so perfectly layered, so filled with cryptic codes, shadowy figures, and tantalizing red herrings that they seem too cinematic, too perfectly architected to be real. They are riddles that don't just ask, who did it, but what game was being played. These are the stories that transcend the boundaries of a typical police file and become a kind of modern mythology, a puzzle box that invites generations of investigators, cryptographers, and amateur sleuths to try and unlock its secrets, only to find more questions hidden inside, each more baffling than the last. Tonight, we open what is arguably the most elegant, the most intricate, and the most impenetrable puzzle box in the entire history of true crime. We are not just examining a case, we are entering a world. We travel to the sun-bleached shores of South Australia in the year 1948, to a time when the globe was shivering in the nascent, paranoid chill of the Cold War. It is here that a story began, not with a bang, but with the quiet discovery of a man who should not have been there, a man who seemed to have been painstakingly erased from the world before he had even left it. He had no name, no past, and a cause of death that defied the science of his day. But he left behind a legacy, a single, haunting clue that would give him his name and define his mystery for all time. This is a deep, exhaustive dive into the case of the Somerton man. It is a story of undetectable poisons, secret pockets sewn into trousers, and a beautiful, mysterious nurse who may have held the key to the entire affair in her tightly closed hands. It is a story that hinges on a torn scrap of paper bearing two ancient Persian words, a code that has resisted the efforts of the world's best minds for over 70 years, and a global search for an identity that has spanned more than 3/4 of a century. This is not just a cold case. It is the ultimate spy mystery, a tale so perfectly constructed that it feels like a final, brilliant transmission from a world of shadows, a world where a life can be finished with a single untraceable act, leaving behind only the ghost of a question. This is the enduring, maddening, and utterly captivating enigma of Tamam Shud. Our story begins on the morning of December 1st, 1948. The place is Somerton Park Beach, a quiet, pleasant stretch of sand just south of the city of Adelaide. The world was still attempting to find its footing after the cataclysm of the Second World War. The Nuremberg trials had concluded, the State of Israel had just been born, and the Berlin blockade was in full swing. The Iron Curtain was descending across Europe, and the first whispers of a new kind of conflict, a Cold War fought not on battlefields, but in alleyways, back rooms, and hidden frequencies were beginning to circulate. Adelaide, though geographically distant from these global tensions, was not immune. It was a crucial node in the British Commonwealth Strategic Network, and nearby, in the desert, the Woomera Rocket Range, a top-secret Anglo-Australian weapons testing facility, was being developed. It was a quiet city with loud secrets. It was into this atmosphere on a warm summer morning that a local jeweler named John Lyons, out for a stroll with his wife, made the discovery. There, propped up against a stone seawall near a building called the Crippled Children's Home, was a man. He was lying in a strangely relaxed, almost casual position, his head resting against the rough stone of the wall, his legs extended, his feet neatly crossed at the ankles. He was impeccably dressed for a man on a beach, a white shirt, a red, white, and blue tie, a brown double-breasted suit jacket, and gray trousers. He looked, to a casual observer, as though he might have been a reveler from the previous night, sleeping off a long evening under the stars. In fact, Lyons and several other witnesses, including a couple who had been out for an evening walk and a group of horsemen, had seen the man in the exact same position the previous evening, around 7 p.m. They had watched him from a distance. One witness saw him extend his arm fully, as if in a strange salute, and then let it drop limply. They had all assumed he was drunk or simply asleep. In the post-war era, it wasn't an entirely uncommon sight. They had thought little of it and continued on their way. But this morning, something was clearly wrong. The man hadn't moved an inch in over 12 hours. A fly buzzed lazily around his face, and he didn't stir. The tide had come in during the night but had stopped just short of his polished leather shoes. An unease settled in, the quiet recognition that a boundary had been crossed. The police were called. When they arrived, they confirmed what the witnesses had begun to suspect. The man was cold. He was dead. From the very first moment of the investigation, the case was steeped in a profound and deliberate strangeness. This was not a typical discovery of a body. This was something else. The first responders and detectives on the scene noted the peculiarities immediately. The man was in peak physical condition. He was estimated to be in his early to mid-40s, about 5 feet 11 inches tall, with broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and strikingly well-developed calf muscles like those of a ballet dancer or a long-distance runner. His hands were soft and clean, showing no calluses or signs of manual labor. His fingernails were manicured. His shoes, though showing some wear, were remarkably clean and appeared to have been recently polished, a bizarre detail for a man who had apparently spent the night on a public beach. There were no signs of violence, no wounds, no bruises, no indication of a struggle. His clothes were neat, his tie was properly knotted. It was a peaceful, almost serene scene of death. He looked, as one officer noted, like a wax dummy. But the first major red flag, the one that immediately elevated this from a routine inquiry to a serious police matter, was the complete and utter lack of identification. The man carried no wallet, no papers, no money, no keys, no personal effects of any kind. He was a complete blank slate. The police then began a more detailed examination of his clothing, and the mystery deepened exponentially. Every single identifying label had been meticulously cut away. The manufacturer's tag from his suit jacket, the brand name from his tie, the laundry marks from his shirt, even the small tag on his undergarments all gone. This was not a man who had simply lost his wallet. This was a man whose identity had been deliberately, systematically, and professionally erased. This was an act of tradecraft. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure he would remain a John Doe, an anonymous body on a beach. He was transported to the Royal Adelaide Hospital for an autopsy. The task fell to one of Australia's most experienced pathologists, Dr. John Dwyer. Dr. Dwyer and his team conducted a thorough examination, and what they found only compounded the enigma. The man's pupils were small, smaller than normal, and unusual in their reaction to light. His spleen was dramatically engorged, almost 3 times its normal size. His liver was congested with blood, and his stomach showed signs of acute gastritis and internal hemorrhaging. These findings were all classic, textbook indicators of death by poisoning. And yet, when extensive toxicology tests were run on his blood, urine, and tissues, they found absolutely no trace of any known poison. Not a single one. The man's last meal, identified as a meat pasty, had been consumed approximately 3 to 4 hours before his death. This pasty, too, was tested for poisons. It was clean. The coroner was baffled. He was looking at a body that screamed poison, but his science could find none. In his final report, he was forced to speculate. He wrote that he was forced to the conclusion that the death could not have been natural. He suggested that the man had been killed by a highly sophisticated and fast-acting poison, one that was either impossible to detect with the technology of the day or one so rare it was virtually unknown to Western science. He mentioned 2 specific types of cardiac glycosides, digitalis and strepfanthin. Both are potent, plant-derived heart poisons. They can be administered orally, are incredibly difficult to trace post-mortem, and kill by inducing rapid cardiac arrest, leaving behind symptoms very similar to those found in the Somerton man. The official cause of death was left frustratingly open. It was likely heart failure, but what caused the heart to fail was a complete mystery. The man had been murdered, but the weapon was invisible. The police were now faced with a monumental, almost impossible task to identify a man who seemed to have no past and to solve a murder that had no weapon. They created a plaster bust of the man's head and face, a common practice at the time. The bust revealed a man with fine, regular features, a high forehead, and a determined chin. His image, along with his fingerprints, was circulated in newspapers and police bulletins across Australia and via Interpol to law enforcement agencies around the world. The response was a deafening, global silence. No one recognized his face. His fingerprints matched no records on file, civilian or military. The Somerton man, as the press had dubbed him, was a phantom. He seemed to have simply materialized on that beach, fully formed, with no history and no connections to the world. The investigation explored every possible lead. Detectives checked the lost property records at the local railway station. There, they found a brown suitcase that had been checked into the cloakroom on November 30th, the day before the body was found. Inside the suitcase, they found a collection of clothes. And just like with the clothes on the body, the name tags had been cut out of most of the garments. However, the mystery tailor had missed a few. On a tie, they found the name T. Keen. On a laundry bag, Keen. And on a singlet, Keen, without the E. Was this the man's name? A nationwide search for a missing T. Keen or Keen turned up nothing. The police concluded it was likely another dead end, a deliberate piece of misdirection. The clothes in the suitcase were of American manufacture, suggesting he may have traveled from the United States, but this too was just speculation. The suitcase also contained a stenciling kit, the kind used for marking cargo on merchant ships, and a thread card of orange wax thread of a type not available in Australia. It was the same thread that had been used to repair a tear in the pocket of the trousers the Somerton man was wearing. This confirmed the suitcase almost certainly belonged to him. It was his life, packed in a bag, but it offered no clue as to who he was. The investigation stalled. The body of the unknown man was embalmed with an unusually strong solution of formalin to preserve it for as long as possible in the hope that an identification would eventually be made. Months passed. The story of the well-dressed man on the beach began to fade from the headlines. The case grew cold. And then came the clue. The clue that would transform this case from a standard, if baffling, police procedural into an enduring global legend. In April of 1949, for long months after the body was discovered, Professor John Cleland, the lead pathologist who was assisting with the case, decided to conduct one more thorough examination of the man's clothing. He went over every seam, every pocket, driven by a nagging feeling that something had been missed. And this time he found it. Tucked deep inside a tiny, hidden fob pocket, a pocket so small and so well concealed in the waistband of the trousers that it seemed to have been sewn in as a secret compartment, was a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of paper. The paper was no bigger than a postage stamp. It had clearly been torn from something larger. On it were printed two words in a distinctive ornate typeface, Tamam Shud. The police were electrified. This was it. A message. A name. A clue from beyond the grave. But what did it mean? An expert from the local library was called in. He identified the words as Persian. They were the final words from the book, The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a famous collection of 11th century poems by the Persian mathematician and astronomer. The phrase has several interpretations, but it generally translates to, "It is ended," or "It is finished." Was this a suicide note? A final, poetic declaration that the man's life was over? It seemed possible. A dramatic flair for a man who chose to end his life on a beach. But it didn't fit with the other, colder facts of the case. The meticulously removed labels, the untraceable poison, the secret pocket. These were not the hallmarks of a simple suicide. This felt like something else. This felt like a message, a piece of tradecraft, a signal. The police now had a new, powerful line of inquiry. The scrap of paper had been torn from a book. Somewhere out there was a copy of the Rubaiyat with its final page missing. They launched a public appeal. They asked the citizens of Adelaide and all of Australia to check their bookshelves. Did anyone have a copy of this specific, rare edition of the book? A 1941 printing by a New Zealand publisher called Whitcomb and Toombs? The appeal was a long shot, but it paid off in the most dramatic way possible. A man, a local professional whose name was kept confidential at the time but was later revealed to be a chemist named John Freeman, came forward. He told the police a bizarre and crucial story. He said that sometime around late November 1948, just before the Somerton man was found, he and his brother-in-law had gone for a drive. He had parked his car near Somerton Beach, leaving the windows open to the sea air. When he returned to the car, he found a book tossed into the back footwell. He thought little of it, assuming a stranger had simply discarded it. He put the book in his glove compartment and forgot all about it. After seeing the police appeal in the newspaper months later, a flicker of memory prompted him to retrieve the book. It was the exact, rare edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam they were looking for. And when he turned to the back, he found that the last page, the page that should have contained the words Tamam Shud, had been torn out. A microscopic analysis would later confirm that the scrap of paper from the dead man's pocket was a perfect match to the tear in the book. The police had found the source. They had the book. And the book held even more secrets. In the back, written faintly in pencil, were two new, electrifying clues that would forever define this mystery. The first was what appeared to be a code. It was 5 lines of capital letters, seemingly random, with the second line crossed out. as if in correction. It looked like this. Gobabd. Mliawi, this line was struck through. Tpimpinit. Mliaboayak. In Samskab. The police were now looking at a cipher. This was the moment the case pivoted decisively from a strange death to a full-blown spy mystery. The seemingly random jumble of letters was almost certainly a coded message. This was not the work of a poet or a suicidal man. This was the work of an agent, a spy, a man who lived and died in a world of secrets. The challenge now was code-breaking. The cipher was immediately sent to the top cryptographers at Australia's Naval Intelligence Directorate. They studied it for weeks, applying every known technique. Their conclusion was a deeply frustrating one. The code was too short to be definitively broken using the methods of the day. It could be a complex, one-time pad cipher which is mathematically unbreakable without the key, or it could be a simple substitution cipher with a key so obscure it was impossible to guess. Or, maddeningly, it could be a meaningless doodle. Without a key, it was gibberish. To this day, the Somerton man's code has never been solved. It remains one of the great unsolved ciphers in the history of cryptography. The second clue in the back of the book was more concrete. It was a telephone number. This was a direct, tangible link to another person. The number was unlisted, which made it even more intriguing. Police traced it to a young woman living in the nearby suburb of Glenelg, a suburb just a stone's throw from Somerton Beach where the body had been found. Her name was Jessica Thompson, though she was known to her friends as Jo. She was a nurse. Detectives went to her home. This was the moment they believed the case would finally break wide open. They told her about the body, about the book, about her phone number written inside it. And they showed her the plaster cast of the Somerton man's face. Her reaction was, by all accounts, extraordinary and deeply suspicious. One of the lead detectives, Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean, would later describe her as being completely taken aback to the point of giving the appearance that she was about to faint. He said she was confused and evasive. She looked at the bust with an expression of pure shock and possibly of recognition. But when they questioned her, she immediately built a wall. She denied everything. She claimed she had no idea who the man was. She said she had no idea why her phone number would be written in a dead man's book. Her denial was firm, but her demeanor told a different story. She was clearly, palpably terrified. She told the police that she was worried for her safety and the safety of her family if her name was released to the public. The police, respecting her apparent fear and perhaps sensing she was involved in something far beyond a simple murder, agreed to keep her identity confidential for decades. She became known in the case files only as Jestin. She did, however, offer one small, tantalizing, and possibly deliberately misleading piece of information. She admitted that she had once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat. She told the police that during World War II in 1945 she had worked at the Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney. There she had met and become close with a man, an army lieutenant named Alfred Boxall. She said she had given him a copy of the Rubaiyat as a gift. This was a bombshell. For a moment it seemed the entire case had been cracked open. The Somerton man must be Alfred Boxall. He was a soldier, which fit the spy theory. He had a direct link to the mysterious nurse. The police were convinced they had their man. They launched an interstate search for Alfred Boxall. They found him. He was alive and well, living in Sydney. And when they interviewed him, he produced his copy of the Rubaiyat, the one Jessica had given him all those years ago. He opened it to the last page. The words Tamam Shud were still there, intact. The lead had evaporated into thin air. The Somerton man was not Alfred Boxall. The police were back to square one, but now the mystery was even more complex and layered. Why did Jessica Thompson bring up Alfred Boxall? Was it a brilliant, calculated misdirection, a red herring thrown to the police to lead them away from the truth and give herself time? Or was there a deeper connection between all three of them? The romantic angle cannot be ignored. When police examined the book Alfred Boxall possessed, they found that Jessica had written an inscription to him on the flyleaf. It was verse 70 from the Rubaiyat. Indeed, repentance oft before. I swore, but was I sober when I swore? And then came spring and rose in hand. My threadbare penitence a piece tore. It's a verse about passion, broken promises, and the irresistible pull of desire. It suggests a deep, perhaps forbidden, romantic connection. Was Jessica involved with both men? Was this a love triangle that ended in a sophisticated, untraceable murder? This brings us back to the central, enigmatic figure of Jessica Thompson. Who was this woman? Was she a simple nurse who found herself tragically entangled with a secret lover involved in a dangerous game? Or was she something more? Was she a swallow or a sparrow, a female agent in the world of espionage, using romance as a tool of the trade? Her fear, her evasiveness, her apparent familiarity with the dead man's face, and her connection to at least two men who owned this specific, rare book of poetry make her the absolute core of this entire affair. She was the keeper of the secrets. She knew who the Somerton man was, and she chose to take that secret to her grave. Let's pause and assemble the pieces of this impossible puzzle. We have an unidentified man, almost certainly murdered by a sophisticated, untraceable poison. His identity has been professionally erased. He is found with a cryptic clue, Tamam Shud, torn from a book of poetry. That book contains an unbreakable code and the phone number of a mysterious nurse who reacts with shock but denies knowing him. This nurse has a history with another man, a soldier, to whom she gave the same book. The entire affair is set against the backdrop of the burgeoning Cold War, in a city that was a known center for intelligence gathering, particularly related to the Woomera rocket range. The conclusion seems almost inescapable. The Somerton man case is a spy mystery of the highest order. This was an assassination. The man was likely a Soviet agent, or perhaps a double agent working for a Western power who had been compromised. He was silenced by his enemies, or perhaps by his own side. The code was his final, undelivered message. Jessica Thompson was his handler, his contact, or perhaps a fellow agent who was now in mortal danger herself. Her fear was real because the threat was real. But who was he? For over 70 years, this has been the ultimate question, the final locked door. In the decades that followed, the case became a global obsession. The plaster bust of his face stared out from countless articles, books, and documentaries. His story became a touchstone for anyone fascinated by unsolved murders and the secret games of nations. And then, in the 21st century, modern science offered a new, powerful key, DNA. A professor at the University of Adelaide named Derek Abbott, a man whose fascination with the case led him down a rabbit hole of research that has consumed years of his life, began a long and arduous campaign to have the Somerton man's body exhumed for DNA analysis. In a strange twist of fate, Abbott would go on to marry Rachel Egan, the woman who turned out to be Jessica Thompson's granddaughter. He saw DNA as the final frontier for the case. In 2021, after years of petitioning, his request was finally granted by the South Australian authorities. The remains of the Somerton man were carefully exhumed from his grave in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery. The analysis of the DNA, extracted from hairs trapped in the original plaster bust, was a painstaking and complex process. But in July of 2022, Professor Abbott announced a stunning breakthrough to the world's media. Working with the renowned American genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, he claimed to have finally solved the 74-year-old mystery of the man's identity. Using advanced DNA sequencing and building a massive genealogical family tree with over 4,000 individuals, they had followed a branch that led them to a name. According to Abbott's research, the Somerton man was Carl Charles Webb. He was an electrical engineer and instrument maker, born in 1905 in Footscray, a suburb of Melbourne. He was the youngest of 6 siblings. He was a man who, records showed, had a keen interest in poetry and betting on horse races, which could offer alternative, non-spy-related explanations for the book of poetry and the coded message. He was married to a woman named Dorothy Robertson, but the marriage had apparently broken down and she had moved away. Webb had essentially fallen off the grid around 1947, a year before his body was found on the beach. This identification, if correct, is a monumental achievement. It gives a name to the ghost. It grounds the sprawling international mystery in the real life of a man from Melbourne. But it also rips open a whole new set of questions. If he was Carl Webb, an engineer, why was he in Adelaide? Why was his identity so meticulously erased by someone? Was his work as an electrical engineer and instrument maker a cover for something else? Did his specific set of skills make him a person of interest to intelligence agencies during the development of sensitive technology like that at Woomera? And most importantly, who killed Carl Webb and why? The identification of the man does not identify his murderer. The official authorities in South Australia are still working to independently verify Abbott's findings. But whether his name was Webb or something else entirely, the core of the enigma remains. The who may be close to being solved, but the why is as dark and as deep as it has ever been. The code remains unbroken. The role of Jessica Thompson remains a secret she guarded for her entire life. The untraceable poison remains a testament to the skill and ruthlessness of his killer. The case of Tam Shud is a masterpiece of mystery. It is a story that operates on multiple levels: a heartbreaking personal tragedy, a brilliant cryptographic puzzle, and a chilling glimpse into the secret wars fought in the shadows. The man on the beach has become a symbol, a permanent resident in the pantheon of the unknown. He is a reminder that even when we think we have all the clues, some stories are so perfectly constructed that they refuse to be finished. The final page may have been torn out, but the mystery itself will likely never be over. It is not, and may never be, Tam Shud. Thank you for joining me on this deep, extended dive into one of the most fascinating and enduring mysteries of all time. I encourage you to look up the code, to read about the ongoing DNA research, and to form your own theories. Please share them in the comments below. If this journey into the world of espionage, codes, and unsolved crime has captured your imagination, please subscribe for more deep explorations of the world's greatest enigmas. Until next time, be careful what secrets you keep and be careful what books you leave in the back of your car.